Good morning everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Present and Speak Without Notes. One of the things you'll notice is all the great speakers, the motivational speakers, the inspirational speakers, those speakers at conferences that have the biggest impact, they don't read word for word from their script. So this webinar, in the 30 minutes I've got, I want to give you some tips and some skills and maybe one or two tools that you can use so that you can gradually move to having the courage to present without the need for notes. Most of you know how to participate. There's that little dialogue box, ask questions anytime. Looking at the list, I think everyone has a microphone, so you can put your hand up and I will open up your microphone and you can ask the question at any time. Take notes and think about how you can use this information. Will you be able to present without notes the next time you speak? Or when you look at a previous presentation, was there something you could have done that you learnt today that would have enabled you to elevate the quality of that previous presentation? So it's about applying some of the knowledge. I'm going to talk to you about the role of notes. So this webinar is about how to speak without notes. It doesn't mean you don't have notes, but you want to present largely without notes. You want to be able to have eye contact, read the audience, allow your peripheral vision to see the nodding of the heads, the shaking of the heads, the closing of the eyes, the rolling of the eyes. When you lose the audience, all of this comes from paying attention to the audience, which you cannot do if you're constantly referring to your notes. So there's 5 models that you can use that I'm going to run through that'll help you present without notes. And what do you do if you do forget? So you take the courage to present without notes and all of a sudden you have that brain fade or that mind goes blank. What do you do? How can you recover? So that's the agenda for today. So let's get started. The role of notes. I would never say to anybody, do not have notes, do not have a framework, an outline, do not have a script. It's what you do with those notes and it's how you use it that's so important. Those of you who've been to my one-day workshops, you'll know that I present for 7 hours without notes. But I do have that workbook up the front that I can refer to if I need to. But 95% of the time, I don't need to refer to it. And if I do refer to it, it's to grab a quote or a statistic or some obscure fact that I can't commit to memory, or there's no need to commit to memory because I've got it written down on a piece of paper. So do use notes. So this is the role of notes. I encourage people to have a full script with them. And if you have a full script, it should be 14 point and 1.5 or double spacing. This way, if you do have to find something in your notes or you do have to glance down, you don't get lost where you are in the line. So when we write speeches for our politicians, and they generally do read their speeches, and I ask you how engaging are most of our politicians. Some of them are really good, but on general when they read word for word from the script. So 14 points, that's a big font, easy to read, and 1.5 to double spacing. So have that with you, have that on the lectern or on the table. But as well as that, I want you to have one of these other things. Have a 1-page bullet point summary. If your bullet points, headings, bullet point, heading, bullet point, have that 1-pager with you so that when you're running a workshop, you can look down at that 1 page and just look at where you are, or just work out what was the next point you're going to go about. And for those of you who've just joined, we've only just started, so I'm talking about the role of notes. Although this is a webinar on how to present without notes, still have some notes with you. Have palm cards. So each of your points or each of the sections of your presentation could be on a separate card. And you sometimes see people just have that palm card, they glance down, and then that's enough to jog their memory, and then they speak. for 4 or 5 minutes without needing to look back to the card. Be careful with palm cards. I've seen people drop the palm cards, and it's like dropping a deck of cards. Everything gets muddled up. So my preference is a one-page summary that I can have up the front, or a mind map. So a mind map is maybe your key principle in the middle, 4 or 5 points off at branches, and I'll talk about mind mapping later on. So I just want to clarify, all the great speakers, they speak extemporaneously, which means they don't read from their notes. It's not spontaneous or off the cuff. It is so well prepared. However, they will still have some sort of written guide up the front with them. Is yours a one-page bullet point summary? Is yours palm cards, or is yours a written mind map? What's your backup model for when maybe your mind does go blank? So that's the role of notes. So let's move on. Five models, 5 strategies to present without notes. First one, tell stories. Second one is have visual cues. Third one is use the most common questions. Fourth one is use mind mapping, which I've briefly mentioned. And the last one is use mnemonics, or use an acronym to help you remember the points you want to talk about. So let me work through these one by one. Stories. So use your personal stories. The power of your stories is that they're your unique intellectual property. So your stories are your case studies, the difficult clients, the problems you've resolved, the difficult situations, the conflict resolutions, the family that was in dire straits and you connected them with some additional resources. They're your unique intellectual property. You own those stories. No one can tell you that did not happen. No one can tell you that's not valid. The beauty of your personal stories is you don't need to write them down. You don't need a script. You know them. You own them. So Steve Jobs, and feel free to look this up on YouTube, Steve Jobs at his Stanford University address to the graduating students said, and it was a 20-minute address, said, let me share with you 3 stories. And he told a story about his early life because he was adopted, so his birthright mother did not want him. The second story was about when he lost control of Apple and what that felt like. And his third story was right now, and that's at the time, he was struggling with cancer of the liver. And that's what finally took him. So he had 3 stories in. At the end of his presentation, the message that he left the students came from each of those 3 stories, and he wove the 3 stories together. So when you tell these stories, you don't need notes. You don't need notes. Let me give you a quick example. I tell a story of the importance of doing your preparation and knowing your audience. You need to know your audience inside out, their culture, their background, what they're thinking, what their pain is. You cannot over-research your audience. The more research you do, the better. I was presenting in Kathmandu in Nepal about 9 months ago, and I had about 35 Nepalese people in the room, and I said to them in my opening comments, who here has heard of Steve Jobs? And everybody shook their head from side to side. I said, surely some of you must have heard of Steve Jobs. And they shook their head from side to side. And in exasperation, I finally said, come on, Steve Jobs, iPhone, the MacBook. And they all shook their heads from side to side. And then someone said, Peter, yes, we've all heard of Steve Jobs. We're saying yes. So what I forgot, what I didn't prepare for, what I didn't understand was that when Hindus bob their head from side to side, that is in agreement. So I hadn't taken the time to follow my own rule and understand my audience. So when you go to an audience, you need to be culturally aware, culturally appropriate. Do your homework, do your background. I don't need to read that story. That story is just one of many examples when people muck up by not knowing their audience. I tell another story of a friend of mine who's blind, and the audience keeps giving him a book to thank him for his presentation. I mean, why would you give a blind man a book? And so these stories, just that little story becomes a 15-minute story that I can tell, and there's a point within that story. And then you can weave your stories around your 3 to 4 points. So if my point is know your audience inside out, do your preparation, one story would be about my presentation in Kathmandu in Nepal. A second story would be about my friend who's blind. So all of a sudden you've got these stories that are yours and unique, that no one can say, no, that is wrong, because this did happen, you know it happened. I don't need to write it, I don't need to remember it. Every time I tell my stories, they come out a little bit differently, but that doesn't matter. And then I collect my bank of stories. I've got 4 or 5 stories about the importance of knowing your audience, and I've just shared 2 of them with you briefly. So the first way to speak without notes is tell stories, but the story must have a point, and the point must have a benefit for the audience. The story must have a point, and the point must have a benefit to the audience. So this is how you can use your stories. So remember, core message, opening and closing, and body. Your core message is your body, 3 or 4 points, and then collect stories. Collect your stories that you add to each point. And you don't have to remember every story. And when you're doing a presentation, you might just pick 1 or 2 stories. So to illustrate the point, the importance of knowing your audience, then they are the 2 stories I chose. I've got other stories, but I'm only doing a half-hour webinar. If I was doing a 1-hour webinar on the importance of knowing your audience, I would share more stories. So that's using stories. Now, please type in questions at any stage that you wish. Use props or visual cues. So this is stuff that I bring up the front with me. So I might have 3 objects, 4 objects, 4 things, 3 things that become my visual cues, and that reminds me how I'm going to talk about it. And it might be even arranged on the desk in order. So for example, when I do a 45-minute presentation on the importance of feedback, so feedback is the food of champions, why every time you speak you should seek feedback, I talk about how to receive feedback and the value of feedback. So my first prop that I'll just have up the front, no one may even know it there, people may not even know it's there, might be a postcard of a group of people. So I've got that postcard, this picture. So one of the ways you can get feedback is have a friend or a colleague in the audience give you feedback. At the end of the presentation, ask them to give you feedback. My second prop might be a mirror. And of course what that means is get some feedback from the mirror, practice in front of the mirror, practice your facial expressions, practice your gesture. Are your gestures noisy, bouncy, distracting? Are you pausing appropriately? All of this you can see in the mirror. And the third way of giving feedback, of course, is to video record yourself. So with the video camera, now I'm not reading anything here. For the video camera, it does not lie. You can hear the audio, so you can hear the quality of your voice, the ums and ahs, you know, the filler words, etc., etc. You can also see your body language, so it's the mirror amplified. Are you doing a distracting waltz? Are you fidgeting with your fingers? Are you playing with jewelry? Do you keep stroking your hair? The video does not lie. You can get coaching from the video. You can send it to a friend or a colleague. So this is all I've got up front, just a little digital video camera. So they're my 3 props. And of course, let me see if I remembered everything. The video camera does not lie. It allows you visual feedback, auditory feedback. You can review it multiple times. You can get a third party, so a coach or a colleague. You can email the AVI or the MP3 file and say, hey, what do you reckon about this? So use visual props, visual cues. Today I'm using my PowerPoint slides as my visual cues. So I'm not reading from notes. I don't have a script. So when you do PowerPoint slides, don't put words up and read from the words. That is the same as reading from a script. So bring something up. 3 books. Each book's got a different title. That may be the structure of my speech. Book 1 might be How to Overcome Your Fear. Book 2 might be The Power of Your Body Language. And Book 3 might be Responding to Questions. So I'm here today to talk to you about 3 things. How to control fear, how to make sure your body works really well, your body language, non-verbal, and how to respond to questions effectively as a speaker. Let's get going. So use visual cues. Use the most common questions. Most of us, we speak in a particular area or a particular topic. What are the 3 most common questions that we get asked? So this is not your Q&A, but you know you're an expert in this area. What are the questions that people ask you most? And if you answer these 3 questions, you probably cover 80% of the content. Let's say you're into retirement planning. Question 1 might be, how much money do I need to retire? And question 2 might be, how can I get that amount of money quickly because I've only got 5 to 10 years before I retire? And question 3 might be, what is the biggest mistake that people do approaching retirement? If they're the most common 3 questions you get, maybe there's a 4th question, but if you answer those 3 questions in your presentation and use that as point 1, point 2, point 3, you know how to answer those questions. You get asked the questions all the time. And if people walk out of your seminar, your workshop, knowing that information, then they've got 80% of the content anyhow in most times. So answer those 3 questions. So I'm here today to talk to you about how to get ready for your financial planning, for your retirement, how to plan for your retirement. Now there's 3 topics I want to talk about. The first one is, how much money do you know? And how do you work out how much money you know that you need? How much money do you need to retire? The second question is, how can you accelerate? How can you get there quicker? How can you get your savings and your investments and your superannuation to help you reach that sum raised in the first point? And the third question, I'm going to talk to you about a couple of the common mistakes that prevent people retiring on the income that they want. Okay, let's get started. Go into point 1. So you don't have to say that they're questions. All I'm saying is, what are the 3 or 4 most frequently questions that you get asked around your topic of expertise? They might be asked in emails, they might be asked in presentations, they might be asked over the telephone, they might be asked one-on-one, face-to-face. Put those 3 or 4 most common questions as your points on your presentation and then answer them. And part of the answers might be, let me give you an example. Let me tell you about Mr. Jones, and you go into the story as well. Use mind mapping. So there's different types of mind maps. There's this kind of mind map where you put the core message, what you want people to walk away with. So what you ought to be able to move quickly to achieving the amount of funds that you need to retire by age 65. Point 1, how much money do you need? And then I might have a couple of subpoints. Point 2, what can I do to accelerate? And they might talk about salary sacrificing and negative gearing and a whole range of things. Subpoint 3, what holds people back? And you may have a 4th point. So this is a traditional mind map. And this, when you fill it out, this could be the sheet of paper you have up the front as your backup. Or you can use some other kind of anchoring mind map. So let's say, and apologies to Hobart, Canberra and to the Northern Territory, Darwin. Let's say I've got 5 points, 5 steps to an effective presentation, and I'm West Australian, so I'm going to start with Perth. Let's see how I go. The first step is preparation. P for Perth, P for preparation. The second step is you've got to have the right attitude. You might have good content, but if you don't have the right attitude, A is for Adelaide, A is for attitude. The next thing is be clear on your message. Clarity of purpose, clarity of what you want people to do at the end is really important. One of the things where people go wrong all the time is people get confused messages. M for Melbourne, M for message. Of course, one of the ways to get your message across, and you've already seen that, is to have a structure. Have that 3 or 4 point structure. S for Sydney, S for structure. And when you put all that together, there's one other layer you need to put on. You might have a lot of preparation, you might have great attitude, you might have a strong message, perfect structure, and deliver it with poor body language. And just stand up, bolt upright, with no emotion in the face, distracting gestures like some of our politicians. B is for Brisbane, B is for body language. Let me see how I went. Preparation, attitude, message, structure. That's a mind map. That's a mind map. Use mind mapping. Biggest problems facing new public speakers: north, east, west, south. Nerves is the biggest problem. Second biggest problem is ego. They come in with their ego state. Third, preparation. Third problem, I can't remember. They have a weak opening and close and self-doubt. So with your mind mapping, whether you use a map of Australia, whether you use 4 points, then you can remember what you want to talk about. And the final one is use of acronyms and mnemonics. Use for you to remember. Don't speak lots of acronyms. Don't speak lots of mnemonics, because jargon and acronyms, and there's that saying, acronyms, bloody acronyms, but it can help you remember. So one of the things I speak about is having the right emotion and the right attitude, and I talk about communicate with care. And this section would normally take me about 40 minutes, and all it is about is having conviction, and I don't have time to go through this extensively. This is from other workshops, from other webinars. Conviction: do you believe in your own message? The A stands for attitude. Have you got the right attitude? Are you passionate? Do you want to be before that audience? You need to let that attitude ooze out of your pores. Responsibility: we spoke about retirement planning. Someone who's going to be struggling to retire and enjoy the retirement they've worked for because of poor financial planning. You as a financial planner, you as a financial guru, you have great responsibility in your seminar. Health professionals, disability professionals, we have responsibility when we speak. You can change people's lives. And finally, the excellence. So this is the polish. This is the good body language. This is the good structure. This is the confident and the competent speaker. Communicate with care. In terms of getting ready for a presentation in my workshop, I use the prime model. I teach the prime model. This is an hour and a half of this is the first hour and a half of my 8-hour workshop. Simply, it means do your preparation. Learn to relax, learn to control those nerves, deep breathing, visualization. Do more speaking, immerse yourself. You need to get on your feet once a week. Monitor and measure. We spoke about feedback. Feedback's the food of champions. How to get feedback? Well, we can have a mirror, we can have a friend in the room, we can video record ourselves. There's other ways of getting feedback. We can do a post-workshop questionnaire. And finally, the last step in the prime model is expand your comfort zone. So you need to take risks. And I talked to you about how to take controlled risks and safe risks, as opposed to jumping in the deep end, having a bad public speaking experience and then saying, that's it, I've tried, Peter. I put my hand up to speak in front of 2,000 people at a national conference in Sydney and I froze. That's not expanding your comfort zone. That's diving in the deep end. That's setting yourself up to fail. So how do you expand your comfort zone? That's my prime model. Preparation. I can spend 30 minutes just talking about preparation, about knowing your audience, which I've already covered a little bit with a couple of those stories. Knowing your venue, owning the venue, arriving early at the venue, and then knowing your topic. Prime model. That acronym gives me an hour and a half keynote without the need for any notes. So what do you do if you do forget? and I do have mind blanks. I do have those fades. There are some things you can do. First of all, go to your notes. Go to your A4 page bullet points or your mind map, or indeed if you've got the full script and it is in big print, and you can quickly flick through the pages and find that quote or find where you're at. So do go to your notes. They are your backup. Don't read from your notes word for word. Go back to your core message. Remember that mind map I showed you, the core message. What is the one thing you want people to walk out of the room with? What is the one big impact you want to have? So go back to that and talk about that a little bit, and then allow your mind to recover. The point may have gone. Maybe you've lost the story. Maybe you've lost the statistic. Just go back and talk about the core message. So my core message is, all the great speakers, they don't read from scripts. It's very hard to engage an audience and read the audience with your peripheral vision if you're reading word from a script or word from a PowerPoint presentation. So when your mind does go blank, just go back to your core message. Don't mention it. One of the things I see in my workshops is people say, oh, look, I've just forgotten what I was going to say. I've just had a seniors moment. Sorry, my mind's gone blank. And then, straight after they've mentioned it, they then move on seamlessly and recover. So, do you know, are you aware that you have no idea what I'm going to say next? And if I forget what I was going to say and I say something else, you do not know that I've changed what I was going to say. And what I see is 99% of the time people recover within 4 to 5 seconds. So just pause and don't let the audience know. Pause and take a deep breath. The deep breath, the deep breathing, the diaphragmatic breathing allows you to oxygenate the blood system. Oxygenated blood goes to the brain functions at a higher level. Keep talking through stuff, umming and ahhing, and then saying, look, I forgot what I was going to say. I don't know what I'm going to do. Just bear with me for a moment. Whew, I need to breathe. Is shallow, rapid breathing and not giving your brain time to recover. So that's my tips to what you do if you do have the brain drain. Go to your notes. Just be silent and walk over and glance down. Sip from water. It's good to have a drink of water. In fact, a couple of times I've paused and just taken a sip. It's good for my voice as well as to pause. Go to your core message. Go back to basics. Don't mention it. Don't draw attention to it. Pause and breathe, and you should be able to recover. So which one of these models can you use to help you put your content into a format that you can present without the need to constantly read or refer to your notes? Are you going to use stories? Are you going to bring up some visual cues? Are you going to go to the most common questions? Mind mapping? Or are you going to use an acronym or a mnemonic? Communicate with care. Prime yourself to speak. Prime, preparation, relaxation, immersion, monitor and measure, and expand your comfort zone. I can talk to you for an hour on that without the need for notes because I have got that acronym in my mind. Any questions at this stage? Any comments? As always, you know you can find out my next webinars. I've got another couple of webinars in February, and I've got workshops all around Australia. I'm going to Echuca in Victoria, Mildura, Bendigo, Melbourne. I've got Bunbury workshops, Karratha workshops, Perth workshops. Please go and have a look. Share the workshops, share the webinars, the webinar links with your friends, your colleagues. Follow me on Facebook, sign up for my newsletter. This is how you find out about these webinars. The latest newsletter that I sent out just a couple of days ago for February was about how to control emotions when speaking. Sometimes we do these difficult presentations, wedding speeches, funeral speeches, farewell speeches, and we just get a little bit emotional. So the newsletter talks about how do we control those emotions. So thank you for your comment. No questions, just glad you found it really useful. We've gone 9:30, so I just want to end it there by saying great speakers don't read from scripts. It's not really engaging the audience. It's not reading the audience. It's not responding to the audience's needs. Reading from your script is probably hitting the audience with the information that you want them to take away with, what you think they need, rather than responding. So it takes courage, but your next presentation, try to deliver without notes.